Imagine the Earth before cities, before nations, before history books. 7 great continents spread across the planet: Africa, Europe, Asia, the Americas, Australia, and Antarctica. Mountains rose, oceans shifted, forests expanded and vanished. Life evolved everywhere. And yet, one species with the power to change the world appeared in only one place. Humans. Not in Europe, not in Asia, not in the Americas, only in Africa. This is one of the deepest mysteries in science. Why did our species emerge there and nowhere else? Was it luck, timing, geography, or was Africa uniquely suited to create beings capable of language, culture, and civilization? For centuries, people proposed many answers. Some imagined humans evolved independently in different regions. Others believed our origins were lost forever in the deep past. But modern science has changed the picture dramatically. Fossils, geology, climate research, archaeology, and especially DNA have all converged on a powerful conclusion. Africa was not just a place where humans happened to appear. It was the only place that had the exact combination of conditions needed to produce us. Tonight, we will follow the evidence piece by piece. We will travel through ancient rift valleys, shifting climates, dangerous predator-filled savannas, and a genetic record written inside every living human. Along the way, we will explore 7 key ideas. Why Africa's geography created the perfect evolutionary laboratory. How unstable climates pushed our ancestors to adapt again and again. What DNA reveals about our shared African ancestry. Why predators may have helped make us smarter and more social. How food and water supported the growth of the human brain. Why human relatives in Europe and Asia ultimately failed to survive. And finally, what truly made Homo sapiens different from every other human species. This is not just a story about bones and ancient landscapes. It is a story of how change, danger, cooperation, and adaptation combined to create us. And perhaps the most surprising part is this. Modern research suggests humanity did not emerge from a single tiny tribe in one isolated corner of Africa. Instead, our species may have formed through connections between many African populations spread across the continent. In other words, Homo sapiens was not born from one village. It was born from an entire continent in motion. So tonight, as the world grows quiet around you, let your mind drift back 300,000 years, back before cities and empires, back to the valleys, lakes, grasslands, and forests of ancient Africa, back to the continent that made us human. Africa is enormous. That may sound obvious, but its size is one of the most important facts in human evolution. It is not a single environment. It is a continent of deserts, rainforests, mountains, lakes, coastlines, grasslands, and river valleys. Hot and cold regions exist within the same landmass. Wet and dry climates can be found only hundreds of miles apart. No other continent offered this level of ecological diversity in one connected space. And diversity matters in evolution. Species evolve fastest when populations face different challenges, become partially isolated, and then sometimes reconnect. Africa provided exactly those conditions for millions of years. At the center of this story lies one of the most important geological features on Earth, the Great Rift Valley. Stretching through eastern Africa, the Rift Valley is a vast system of cracks and valleys created by tectonic forces pulling the continent apart. Over millions of years, this process created lakes, volcanoes, changing landscapes, and a mosaic of habitats. For early hominins, it was a paradise of evolutionary opportunity. Forests existed beside open grasslands. Water sources shifted. Animal populations moved. Food sources changed from region to region. Populations of early humans could become separated by geography, adapt in different ways, and later mix again. This pattern, separation, adaptation, reunion, helped generate extraordinary genetic diversity. East Africa was especially important because it sat at the boundary between forests and savannas. That boundary zone may have shaped one of humanity's defining traits, walking upright. In dense forests, climbing is useful. In open grasslands, standing upright offers advantages. Seeing over tall grass, carrying food, using tools, and traveling efficiently across long distances. The changing East African environment repeatedly pushed our ancestors between these worlds. Too much forest, and climbing remained dominant. Too much grassland, and survival became difficult without flexibility. The shifting balance between the two created evolutionary pressure for adaptable, upright, tool-using hominins. Africa's sheer scale added another crucial ingredient. Large populations could spread across different environments and evolve separately for thousands of years. But unlike isolated islands, these populations were not permanently cut off. Climate shifts could reconnect regions, allowing groups to mix genetically. This constant cycle increased diversity instead of locking populations into evolutionary dead ends. Modern genetic studies show that African populations contain far more genetic diversity than populations outside Africa. That is exactly what we would expect from a continent that hosted human evolution for the longest time. Now compare Africa with other regions. Europe was repeatedly covered by harsh Ice Age climates. Large areas became too cold for continuous human habitation. Asia was vast, but many regions were more environmentally uniform than East Africa's rapidly changing mosaic. The Americas were not even available for most of human evolution. Humans arrived there only recently in evolutionary terms. Australia was isolated and relatively limited in ecological variety. None of these places combined Africa's climate diversity, geographic connectivity, and long-term environmental dynamism. Another overlooked factor is time. Africa hosted hominin evolution for millions of years. Species after species appeared there. Australopithecus, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, and eventually Homo sapiens. Evolution is not a quick process. It requires immense stretches of time, repeated environmental pressure, and many failed experiments. Africa provided all three. Fossil evidence also supports this central role. Some of the oldest known hominin fossils come from East and South Africa. Sites in Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, and South Africa preserve a long and unusually rich record of human ancestry. This does not mean Africa was a peaceful cradle where evolution unfolded gently. It was harsh, unstable, and dangerous, and that may be exactly why it worked. Species that survived there had to become flexible. They had to handle change. They had to cooperate, innovate, and adapt repeatedly. In a stable environment, specialization can succeed. In an unstable environment, versatility becomes king. Humanity's defining trait is not strength, speed, or claws. It is adaptability. And Africa was the perfect place to evolve it. Africa was not an accident of human origins. It was evolution's greatest laboratory. We often imagine ancient Africa as a timeless landscape of endless savannas, but the reality was far more unstable. For millions of years, Africa's climate repeatedly shifted between wetter and drier phases. Forests expanded and contracted. Lakes appeared and vanished. Grasslands spread, then retreated. Rivers changed course. Entire ecosystems transformed over relatively short evolutionary timescales. This instability may have been the engine that drove human evolution. The key mechanism behind these changes involves subtle variations in Earth's orbit and rotation, known collectively as Milankovitch cycles. Roughly every 23,000 years, changes in Earth's wobble altered how much sunlight reached different regions of the planet. In Africa, these orbital shifts strongly affected rainfall patterns. During wetter periods, monsoon systems intensified. Forests and woodlands expanded across large areas. Lakes filled and rivers flowed more strongly. During drier periods, rainfall weakened. Forests shrank. Open grasslands spread across the landscape. For animals and early humans, this meant the world was constantly changing. A habitat that worked for one species during a wet phase might become hostile during a dry phase. Food sources changed. Migration routes shifted. Water availability fluctuated. This is where a major scientific idea enters the story: the pulse climate variability theory. According to this view, human evolution was not driven by one long gradual trend toward drier grasslands. Instead, it was pushed forward by repeated pulses of environmental change. Each climate shift created new challenges. Some hominin populations failed and disappeared. Others adapted and survived. Over millions of years, this process favored creatures that could handle uncertainty. That adaptability became humanity's greatest evolutionary advantage. Paleoanthropologist Rick Potts developed a related idea called the variability selection hypothesis. He argued that the most successful hominins were not those specialized for one environment, but those able to survive across many different conditions. In other words, our ancestors evolved to cope with change itself. Think about what that means. A species perfectly adapted to dense forests would struggle when grasslands expanded. A species specialized for open plains would struggle when forests returned. But a flexible species, able to use different foods, travel longer distances, cooperate socially, and invent new behaviors, could survive both. That flexibility is deeply human. It may explain why our lineage persisted while many other hominin species vanished. Climate instability also encouraged movement and mixing. During favorable periods, populations could expand into new regions and reconnect with other groups. During harsh periods, populations became isolated in environmental refuges, such as lake regions or fertile valleys. Isolation allowed groups to evolve differently. Reconnection allowed genes and ideas to spread again. This repeated cycle helped generate the extraordinary genetic diversity seen in African populations today. Archaeological evidence supports the importance of changing environments. Stone tool technologies often shifted during periods of climatic stress. Human populations appear to move in response to expanding lakes or shrinking resources. Some researchers even propose that major cognitive advances, such as improved planning, social cooperation, and symbolic behavior, were favored because unpredictable environments rewarded intelligence and flexibility. Imagine living in such a world. One generation grows up near abundant lakes and woodlands. A few thousand years later, descendants face drier grasslands and scattered water sources. Survival would depend on experimentation, memory, communication, and cooperation. You cannot rely on one fixed strategy forever. And that may be the deepest lesson Africa taught our ancestors. Change is normal. Adaptation is survival. Modern humans inherited bodies, brains, and social systems shaped by that ancient instability. We are descendants of populations that repeatedly face environmental uncertainty and learn to navigate it. Africa did not produce humanity despite its changing climate. It produced humanity because of it. The continent kept moving the goalposts, and our ancestors became experts at adjusting. In the end, Africa's greatest gift may not have been a particular habitat at all. It was unpredictability. Africa made us adaptable. For much of history, scientists could only guess where humans came from. Fossils were incomplete, archaeology was limited, and ancient migrations were difficult to reconstruct. Competing theories emerged. Some researchers argued that modern humans evolved simultaneously in different regions of the world. Others suspected a single origin, but lacked definitive proof. Then genetics changed everything. Inside nearly every cell of your body is a historical archive written in DNA. By comparing genetic differences between populations, scientists can trace ancestry, estimate population splits, and reconstruct ancient migrations. And the genetic evidence points overwhelmingly to Africa. One of the strongest clues is genetic diversity. Populations in sub-Saharan Africa contain far more genetic variation than populations outside Africa. That matters because genetic diversity accumulates over time. The longer a population exists in one region, the more mutations and variations build up within it. If humans had originated elsewhere, we would expect the greatest diversity there. Instead, the deepest and richest genetic variation is African. This suggests that human populations lived in Africa for far longer than anywhere else. The evidence becomes even more striking when we look at mitochondrial DNA or mtDNA. Mitochondria are tiny structures inside cells that produce energy, and they carry their own DNA. This DNA is passed almost exclusively from mothers to children. By comparing empty DNA around the world, researchers discovered that all living humans can trace their maternal ancestry back to a woman who lived in Africa roughly 150,000 to 200,000 years ago. She is often called Mitochondrial Eve. The name can be misleading. She was not the only woman alive at the time. Rather, she is a woman whose maternal line survived in every living person today. A similar pattern appears in the Y chromosome, which is passed from fathers to sons. Genetic studies trace modern paternal lineages back to an African ancestor, sometimes called Y chromosomal Adam. Together, these findings strongly support a recent African origin for modern humans. But genetics reveals more than origin. It also reveals movement. At some point around 60,000 to 70,000 years ago, a relatively small group of humans left Africa and spread across the rest of the world. Because this migrating population was small, it carried only part of the genetic diversity present in Africa. This is known as a population bottleneck. As a result, non-African populations are genetically less diverse than African populations. You can still see this pattern today. A person from sub-Saharan Africa is likely to carry more genetic variation than a person from Europe, Asia, or the Americas. That is exactly what we would expect if the latter populations descended from a smaller, founding group that left Africa. Modern genomics has repeatedly confirmed this picture. Large-scale DNA studies comparing thousands of people across the globe consistently place the deepest branches of the human family tree in Africa. Ancient DNA extracted from fossils has strengthened the case further. Interestingly, genetics also revealed something unexpected. Modern humans interbred with other human species after leaving Africa. People outside Africa carry small amounts of Neanderthal DNA, and some populations in Asia and Oceania carry Denisovan DNA. But these contributions are minor additions to a fundamentally African ancestry. The core of modern human genetics remains rooted in Africa. Another important insight is that humanity did not arise from one tiny isolated tribe. Genetic evidence suggests that ancient African populations were structured and diverse. Groups separated, adapted locally, and later mixed again. This fits remarkably well with the geographic and climatic picture from earlier chapters. A large continent with shifting environments and periodically reconnecting populations. In a sense, every living human carries a map of that history. Your DNA contains traces of ancient African populations, migrations, bottlenecks, and mixtures stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. The conclusion is difficult to escape. The fossil record points to Africa. The geology points to Africa. The climate story points to Africa. And now the genetic evidence points there too. Every human being alive today is part of one extended African family. We may speak different languages, live on different continents, and belong to different cultures, but genetically we are branches of the same ancient tree. Our species story begins in Africa. This chapter begins with a strange idea. The creatures most dangerous to our ancestors may have helped make us human. Ancient Africa was not a gentle cradle. It was a landscape filled with predators, lions, leopards, hyenas, crocodiles, and now extinct saber-toothed cats. Early hominins were not at the top of the food chain. They were vulnerable, relatively slow, and physically weaker than many large carnivores. To survive, they had to cooperate. Predator pressure rewards social behavior. A lone individual is easy prey. A coordinated group is much harder to attack. Living together improves vigilance, defense, child protection, and food sharing. Over time, natural selection favored hominins who could communicate effectively, maintain social bonds, and coordinate group action. In other words, danger may have pushed our ancestors towards stronger social intelligence. This idea fits with evidence from primates and other social animals. Species facing intense predation often develop tighter group structures and more sophisticated communication. For early humans, cooperation was not a luxury. It was survival technology. Imagine a small group crossing open grassland at dusk. Tall grass hides movement. Predators may be nearby. One individual spots danger and warns the others. The group gathers children, climbs rocks, or arms itself with stones and sticks. Those who trusted one another and responded quickly were more likely to survive. Repeated over thousands of generations, such pressures could shape cognition and behavior. Predators may also have encouraged strategic thinking. Early humans needed to track threats, anticipate ambushes, remember safe routes, and coordinate responses. These demands rewarded flexible intelligence rather than brute strength alone. Some researchers describe this as an evolutionary arms race. Predators became more effective hunters. Hominins became more effective cooperators. Neither side evolved in isolation. There's another fascinating comparison here. When modern humans eventually reached places like the Americas and Australia, many large animals behaved with little fear toward them. Those ecosystems had not evolved alongside human hunters for long. As a result, many megafauna species were unusually vulnerable and went extinct relatively quickly after human arrival. Africa was different. African animals had evolved alongside hominins for millions of years. They recognized humans as threats. Humans, in turn, had evolved strategies to deal with dangerous wildlife. A kind of uneasy balance emerged. That long coevolutionary history may have shaped both sides. African predators became wary and adaptable. Humans became cooperative, alert, and strategically intelligent. Predator pressure alone did not create humanity, of course, but it may have provided one of the crucial selective forces that favored the social and cognitive traits defining our species today. Our ancestors did not evolve in safety. They evolved under pressure. And sometimes pressure creates remarkable things. The lions and leopards of ancient Africa were not trying to build human civilization, but by forcing our ancestors to cooperate, communicate, and think ahead, they may have helped shape the minds that eventually did. Large brains are expensive. The human brain uses about 20% of the body's energy, while making up only a small fraction of its weight. Evolving such an organ required a reliable supply of calories and nutrients. Africa provided that supply. One major advantage was ecological variety. Ancient African environments offered many different food sources across the year: fruits, roots, seeds, insects, meat, and later fish and shellfish. When one resource became scarce, others were often available elsewhere nearby. Water was especially important. The Great Rift Valley contained numerous lakes and wetlands that persisted for long periods, even as surrounding climates changed. These freshwater systems created stable habitats, rich in plant and animal life. Loch shores and river valleys may have acted as refuges during harsh dry periods, allowing human populations to survive when other regions became difficult. Aquatic resources may have played a surprisingly important role in brain evolution. Fish and shellfish contain omega-3 fatty acids, particularly DHA, which are important for brain development and function. Some researchers argue that regular access to these nutrients helps support the growth of larger human brains. The evidence is still debated, but coastal and lakeside sites show that early humans increasingly exploited aquatic foods. The East African coast may have been especially significant. Some scientists describe it as a coastal highway, where early Homo sapiens used marine resources while moving along shorelines. Shellfish, fish, and other coastal foods could provide dense nutrition with relatively low hunting risk. Diet variety mattered too. A flexible diet encourages flexible behavior. Early humans were not locked into one narrow food strategy. They could gather plants, hunt animals, scavenge carcasses, fish, and exploit seasonal resources. This dietary adaptability likely supported both survival and cognitive complexity. Cooking, which became increasingly important later in human evolution, amplified these advantages by making food easier to digest and more energy-rich. Resource abundance does not mean life was easy. Droughts still occurred. Food shortages still happened. Competition still existed. But compared with many other regions, parts of Africa offered an unusual combination of stable water sources, diverse ecosystems, and nutrient-rich foods over very long timescales. That combination may have helped sustain larger populations and support the energetic demands of growing brains. In a sense, Africa did not just shelter our ancestors. It fed the biological experiment that became humanity. Human evolution did not happen only in Africa. Members of the genus Homo spread into Europe and Asia long before modern humans appeared. Homo erectus, one of our successful early relatives, left Africa nearly 2 million years ago and occupied huge regions of Eurasia. So why did modern humans still arise only in Africa? Because most of those other branches became evolutionary dead ends. In Europe, populations eventually evolved into Neanderthals. They were intelligent, skilled toolmakers, and physically powerful. They survived harsh Ice Age environments for hundreds of thousands of years. But they did not become us. In Asia, other populations evolved into Denisovans and possibly additional poorly understood groups. They too were successful for long periods, but they also disappeared. Why? One possibility is that these regions lack the same combination of pressures that shaped Homo sapiens in Africa. Europe's Ice Age environments were often brutally cold and relatively stable over long stretches. Adaptation, their favored physical robustness, and specialization for harsh climates. Neanderthals became excellent survivors of that world, but perhaps less flexible when environments changed rapidly. Parts of Asia were vast and ecologically varied, but many populations became more geographically isolated than African populations did. Isolation can produce unique species, but it can also reduce the large-scale mixing and diversity that seem to have characterized Africa. Island environments show this even more clearly. Homo floresiensis, sometimes called a hobbit, evolved on the Indonesian island of Flores into a small-bodied human species adapted to island conditions. It was a remarkable evolutionary experiment, but not the path that led to global humanity. Africa's difference was not simply warmth or age. It was a combination of factors working together: repeated climate instability, geographic diversity, population mixing, resource variety, and intense social and ecological pressures. Other regions had some of these ingredients. Africa had all of them. Another important point is that evolution does not move toward a predetermined goal. Neanderthals were not less evolved than modern humans. They were adapted to their environments. The question is not why they failed in an absolute sense, but why Homo sapiens ultimately proved more resilient and expansive. One answer may be adaptability itself. African populations repeatedly faced changing environments and shifting connections between groups. This may have selected for behavioral flexibility, broader social networks, and greater capacity for innovation. When Homo sapiens eventually spread beyond Africa, they entered the world carrying that flexible toolkit, and the archaeological record suggests it mattered. Modern humans expanded into diverse environments with extraordinary speed: deserts, forests, coastlines, mountains, and eventually the Arctic. They developed varied technologies, symbolic culture, and long-distance exchange networks. Meanwhile, other human species gradually disappeared. Some interbred with us before vanishing. Others may have been outcompete, absorbed, or pushed into shrinking habitats. By about 40,000 years ago, Homo sapiens was the last surviving human species on Earth. The world had hosted many human experiments. Only one became global, and that experiment began in Africa. By now, the pattern is clear. Africa provided the geography, climate variability, genetic diversity, predators, and resources that shaped human evolution. But one final question remains. What made Homo sapiens different from every other human species? The answer may lie in an unusual combination of social intelligence and continental scale connectivity. Neanderthals were intelligent. Denisovans were capable. Other human relatives made tools and survived difficult environments. But modern humans appear to have developed an extraordinary ability to cooperate beyond immediate family groups. That matters enormously. Many animals cooperate with relatives. Humans cooperate with strangers. We build alliances with people we have never met before. We trade across long distances, share stories, follow shared rules, and organize large communities of unrelated individuals. This kind of cooperation requires something powerful: language. Not just simple signals, but recursive language, the ability to combine ideas into endless new meanings. With language, humans could plan hunts, teach skills, preserve memories, negotiate alliances, and create shared myths. Language turned knowledge into a collective inheritance. One generation no longer had to start from scratch. Ideas could accumulate. Culture could evolve faster than biology. Africa's structure may have helped this process emerge. Remember the pattern from earlier chapters. Populations sometimes isolated, sometimes reconnected. In a continent this large, groups could develop locally unique ideas and behaviors. Later, climate shifts or migrations could bring populations back into contact. When groups met, they exchanged genes, tools, and cultural innovations. This created a dynamic network, rather than a single isolated lineage. Recent research increasingly supports a Pan-African model of human origins. Instead of Homo sapiens appearing in one small location and spreading outward, different populations across Africa contributed to our species' development. Fossils from Jebel Irhoud in Morocco, Homo Kaibish in Ethiopia, and Florisbad in South Africa all show important human features at roughly similar times. No single site contains the entire story. That suggests modern humans emerged through interactions among multiple African populations over long periods. In other words, Homo sapiens was not born in one village. We were assembled from a continent-wide network. This may explain why our species became so adaptable. We inherited diversity from many populations facing different environments and challenges. We were, from the beginning, a connected species. Another key difference may have been cultural flexibility. Modern humans appear to have developed richer symbolic behavior. Art, ornamentation, ritual, and long-distance social ties. These behaviors strengthen group identity and cooperation. They allow large communities to function, even when members are not closely related. Once that threshold was crossed, human societies gained a powerful feedback loop. Better communication enabled larger cooperation. Larger cooperation enabled more innovation. More innovation improved survival and expansion. Expansion created new connections and new ideas. The process accelerated. Eventually, Homo sapiens left Africa carrying not only tools and bodies adapted to change, but also a uniquely social and symbolic mind. That mind built agriculture, cities, science, and civilization. And it all traces back to populations shaped by the landscapes and climates of ancient Africa. We are not the product of one miraculous moment. We are the product of millions of years of interaction between environment, biology, and culture across an entire continent. So, why did humans evolve only in Africa? Because Africa was not just another continent. It was a rare convergence of conditions that existed nowhere else on Earth. Its geography created isolated yet reconnecting populations. Its rift valley generated ecological diversity and evolutionary pressure. Its unstable climate rewarded adaptability over specialization. Its predators encouraged cooperation and intelligence. Its lakes, rivers, coasts, and fertile landscapes provided the nutrition needed for growing brains. And its vast interconnected populations eventually produced a species capable of language, culture, and large-scale cooperation. Other regions hosted human relatives. Europe produced Neanderthals. Asia produced Denisovans and other lineages. Islands produced strange evolutionary experiments. But only Africa combined all the necessary ingredients to produce Homo sapiens. And perhaps the most important lesson is this. Humanity was shaped by change. Our ancestors survived because they could adapt when forests disappeared, when droughts arrived, when predators threatened, and when environments shifted again and again. The modern human mind is, in many ways, a machine for handling uncertainty. That is the legacy Africa gave us. We often think of Africa as the beginning of the story, but genetically, culturally, and evolutionarily, it is still part of us. Every living person carries traces of those ancient African populations. The deepest roots of our family tree remain there, written into our DNA. Tonight, as you drift toward sleep, remember this simple truth. You are part of a lineage shaped by millions of years of survival, cooperation, and adaptation on the African continent. We may now live on every continent of Earth, but our story began in one place. Africa did not just host human evolution. It created the conditions that made humanity possible. Good night.